At my daughter's wedding, her brand new husband accidentally tripped and poured a full glass of red wine right over my head. 158 high society guests laughed at me. My own daughter just sat there, pale and silent, refusing to defend me. But I did not get angry. I did not yell. Instead, I calmly wiped my face, walked up to the stage, grabbed the microphone, and said 5 simple words that made my new son-in-law scream in absolute terror. Before I tell you exactly what those 5 words were and how I utterly destroyed his life, take a deep breath. If you have ever been taken advantage of by family, hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. Let me know in the comments where you are watching from today. It brings this old man a lot of joy to see where my stories travel. My name is Harrison Cole. I am 70 years old, and for 40 years I built a commercial real estate empire right here in the heart of Boston. I did not inherit a single dime. I built my life on concrete steel and a ruthless ability to read people. When you spend decades negotiating with sharks, you learn to spot a predator from a mile away. 2 years ago, I lost my brilliant wife, Carolyn, to a brutal illness. Since then, my only weak spot in this entire world has been our 28-year-old daughter, Harper. Harper is a sweet, gentle girl. She works as an art director and is completely naive when it comes to money. That is exactly why I set up an ironclad trust fund for her. I wanted her protected. I wanted her safe. It was a regular Tuesday morning when my phone chimed with a priority alert from my private wealth management bank. The notification was brief, but it hit me like a physical blow to the chest. A withdrawal had just been authorized from Harper's secondary trust account. The amount was exactly $450,000. I sat back in my heavy leather armchair and stared at the glowing screen. $450,000. That was not a random number to me. 40 years ago, that was the exact profit of my very first major commercial real estate flip. That was the money that built my empire. It is a number I associate with hunger, sweat, and relentless ambition. Seeing it vanish from my daughter's account in a single second did not make me sad. It made my instincts flare. I know the smell of a bad deal, and this smelled like pure, unadulterated greed. Harper did not buy real estate. Harper did not invest in stocks. She barely knew how to read a basic balance sheet. Someone was draining her account, and I knew exactly who it had to be. I picked up my phone and dialed her number immediately. I expected to hear her soft, confused voice explaining some minor misunderstanding with the bank. The phone rang 3 times. When the line finally clicked open, it was not my daughter who answered. "Hello, Harrison," a smooth, overly confident voice echoed through the speaker. It was Trent Lawson, Harper's fiancé. Trent was 32 years old, wore suits that were a little too tight, and introduced himself to everyone in our circle as a tech startup chief executive officer. From the very first day I met him, I saw right through his act. He was a man who talked endlessly about changing the world, but never had any dirt under his fingernails. He drove a leased sports car and paid for expensive dinners using credit cards I strongly suspected were maxed out. "Put my daughter on the phone, Trent," I said. My voice was low and completely devoid of emotion. I never raise my voice when money is involved. Panic is for amateurs. Harper is a bit tied up right now, Harrison. She is looking at floral arrangements for the wedding. We are only 3 weeks away, you know. He let out a light, arrogant chuckle. "Is there something I can help you with?" I did not waste time with pleasantries. I asked him directly why $450,000 had just evaporated from a protected trust fund. I wanted to know what kind of emergency required $500,000 on a random Tuesday morning. There was a pause on the line. I could hear the faint sound of city traffic in the background. When Trent finally answered, his voice lacked any trace of respect. He sounded bored, as if he were explaining basic math to a slow child. "Oh, that," Trent said, clicking his tongue dismissively. "You do not need to worry your old head about that, Harrison. It is just a temporary bridge loan for my artificial intelligence startup. The tech world moves fast. You have to strike when the iron is hot." Harper completely understands the vision. She agreed to invest in our future. A bridge loan. He called $500,000 of my daughter's safety net a bridge loan. But that is not how investments work, Trent, I replied, keeping my tone perfectly level. Trust funds require authorizations. They require due diligence. You do not just withdraw a bridge loan to fund a company without a single commercial product on the market. I could practically hear him rolling his eyes. Look, Harrison, he sighed, adopting a tone of exaggerated patience. I know you built some buildings back in the day, but business has changed. Technology is different. You just do not understand how modern startups operate. You are stuck in the past. Do not worry. When my company goes public, I will make sure you get a nice front row seat. Now, if you will excuse me, I have a venue meeting to get to. We will see you at the rehearsal dinner. The line went dead. I slowly lowered the phone to my desk. He had hung up on me. He had taken my daughter's money, insulted my intelligence, and hung up the phone as if I were nothing but an annoying distraction. He thought I was just a clueless old man who would roll over and accept it for the sake of family peace. He was wrong. Dead wrong. Trent Lawson thought he had just secured his future. He had no idea that he had just signed his own death warrant. I did not waste a single second staring at the dead phone. I immediately dialed Harper on her personal cell number. The line rang again, and this time the heavy silence of waiting felt like hours. When she finally answered, I could hear the hesitation in her breath before she even spoke a single word. "Hello, Dad," she said softly. Her voice trembled just a fraction the way it always did when she knew she had done something she should not have. I did not yell. I kept my voice steady, grounding her with the firm tone I had used since she was a little girl. "Harper," I said, "I need you to tell me why $500,000 was just removed from your trust to fund a company that does not exist." "Dad, please, do not be mad," she began, her words rushing out in a nervous tumble. Trent explained it all to me. It is not just some company. It is an artificial intelligence platform. He is a visionary dad. He sees where the future is going. He just needs a little capital to get the prototype finished before the big venture capitalists jump in. He said if we wait for the traditional bank loans, we will miss the market window completely. I listened to my daughter parrot phrases she clearly did not understand. Market windows. Venture capitalists. Prototype funding. These were Trent's words shoved into her mouth to justify robbing her blind. "Harper, honey." "Listen to me very carefully," I replied. "Visionaries do not need to drain their future wife's emergency trust fund. If his technology was truly revolutionary, investors would be throwing money at him. He would not need to take your mother's legacy to keep the lights on." I heard a muffled voice in the background. It was Trent whispering instructions to her. I could picture him standing right next to her, feeding her the lines, manipulating her emotions in real time. Harper sighed, and when she spoke again, her tone shifted from defensive to frustrated. "You just do not like him, Dad. You have never liked him because he does not wear a hard hat or pour concrete. You think the only real work is real estate. That is not true, and you know it," I said. "I respect hard work in any industry. What I do not respect is a man who uses a woman for a paycheck. I do not respect a man who takes a bridge loan from his bride 3 weeks before the wedding. That is not business, Harper. That is theft." "Please stop calling it that," she pleaded, her voice cracking. "It is an investment in our future as a married couple. We are going to build a life together. Trent says this is the final push he needs to secure a massive buyout. He is working so hard, Dad. He is stressed all the time. He just needed someone to believe in him." I closed my eyes and pinched the bridge of my nose. The level of manipulation was staggering. Trent had positioned himself as the misunderstood genius, the stressed-out martyr, and he had convinced my empathetic, kind-hearted daughter that it was her romantic duty to save him. She was not making a financial decision. She was making an emotional one. "Harper," I said gently, "if he truly loved you, he would never put your financial security at risk. Your mother and I set that money aside so you would always have a safety net. It was not meant to be venture capital for a man who drives a leased sports car he cannot afford. Do not bring Mom into this. Harper snapped, her voice suddenly sharp and defensive. You have been suffocating me ever since she died. You track my life, you judge my choices, and you criticize the man I love. Mom would have wanted me to be happy. She would have supported us. She always believed in taking chances on love. She was not rigid and controlling like you. The accusations stung, hitting a raw nerve. Carolyn had been the soft one, the heart of our family. But she was also incredibly smart. Carolyn would have seen Trent for the parasite he was the moment he walked through our front door. Dad, the wedding is in 3 weeks. Harper continued, her voice dissolving into quiet sobs. Everything is finally coming together. The venue is booked, the guests are flying in, and I just want to be happy. Please, I am begging you, do not ruin this for me. Do not make this a massive fight. Just trust me for once in my life. Trust that I know what I am doing. I could hear Trent murmuring again in the background, a low hum of false comfort. He was probably holding her hand, acting like the supportive partner, while simultaneously reaching into her pocket. I realized then that reasoning with her was completely useless. Trent had isolated her emotionally. He had twisted my concern into control, my protection into suffocation. If I pushed harder right now, she would only cling to him tighter. He had built a psychological wall around her, and logic was not going to break it down. She was blind-bound by her own good intentions and his expertly crafted lies. I knew I had to back off, at least in her eyes, to win this war. I am sorry, Harper, I said softly. I do not want to fight with you, and I certainly do not want to ruin your wedding. I just want you to be safe. I will let it go. We will talk later. I love you. Before she could say another word, I ended the call. I placed the phone flat on my desk. The time for talking was officially over. I took a deep breath and opened my contacts list. Trent thought he could outsmart me using my own daughter as a human shield. I sat in the silence of my study for a long moment. My chest ached with a heavy, hollow pain. Harper's words about her mother echoed in the quiet room. She had weaponized Carolyn's memory, an old wound she knew would paralyze me. Any other father might have crumbled. Any other father might have poured a drink, wallowed in self-pity, or driven over there to drag his daughter away from that parasite. But I am not any other father. I did not build my empire by surrendering to my emotions. I built it by compartmentalizing them. I locked away the grief of a father and put on the cold, calculating armor of a businessman. Trent Lawson wanted to play a high-stakes game with my family's money. It was time to show him what happens when you sit at the table with the house. I picked up my phone and dialed a number I rarely used outside of corporate warfare. The line rang only twice before a sharp, professional voice answered. Gregory Pierce was my personal attorney and the senior partner at the most ruthless corporate law firm in Boston. He was not a man who dealt in feelings. He dealt in contracts, asset protection, and corporate destruction. We had worked together for 30 years, and he knew my tone better than anyone. Good morning, Harrison, Gregory said. I assume this is not a social call. Far from it, Gregory, I replied. I need you to drop whatever you are doing. We have a major breach in Harper's secondary trust account. Someone just withdrew $450,000 an hour ago. I heard rapid keyboard clicking on his end. Gregory did not gasp or ask unnecessary questions. He immediately went into crisis mode. Pulling up the file now, he said. Did Harper authorize this withdrawal? She did, but she is acting under heavy coercion from Trent Lawson, her fiancé, I explained. He convinced her to funnel the money into a completely fabricated artificial intelligence startup. He is calling it a bridge loan. I want a complete freeze on the remaining assets immediately. Shut down every wire transfer lock, every linked account, and block any further distributions until I give the word. Consider it done, Gregory replied, his tone entirely clinical. I will contact the wealth management division at the bank and initiate an emergency hold. But Harrison, we have a procedural problem here. That secondary trust was established with a strict dual-signature authorization protocol. Harper cannot unilaterally move any sum over $50,000 without your explicit consent. How did the bank clear a transfer of nearly $500,000 without contacting you first? That is exactly what I want to know, I said, my voice hardening. I never signed a single document. I never received an authorization request. Call the bank president if you have to. I want the exact paper trail. I want to see the wire instructions, the destination account, and the authorization forms. I want to know exactly how Trent Lawson managed to bypass the ironclad security measures we put in place to prevent this very scenario. Give me 5 minutes, Gregory said. I am pulling the original trust charter from our archives right now while my associate gets the bank on the line. I will call you right back. The line went silent. I paced the length of my study looking out the large windows at the Boston skyline. The anger simmering beneath my skin was entirely focused now. Trent had not just manipulated my daughter emotionally. He had executed a sophisticated financial maneuver. He had navigated a complex legal structure to extract the cash. This was not the work of a clumsy gold digger. This was the calculated strike of a predator who had thoroughly researched his target. He had studied the trust. He knew exactly what he was doing. My phone buzzed, shattering the silence. I answered it immediately. Harrison Gregory said, his voice unusually tight. I have the answers, and you are not going to like them. I initiated the freeze on the account, but the bank informed me that the dual signature requirement is no longer legally binding. What do you mean it is no longer binding? I demanded. I wrote that stipulation when we established the fund. It was specifically designed to protect her until she was mature enough to handle that level of wealth. You did, Gregory agreed. But Carolyn also included a standard age of maturity clause. We drafted this document almost a decade ago. At the time, we structured it so that the dual signature protocol would automatically expire when Harper reached a certain age. I felt a sudden sickening drop in my stomach. The memory surfaced from the depths of my mind. Carolyn and I sitting in Gregory's office discussing our daughter's future. Carolyn insisting that we could not treat Harper like a child forever, that eventually she needed the freedom to control her own destiny. What was the age, Gregory? I asked, though I already knew the terrible answer. 28, Harrison Gregory replied quietly. Harper turned 28 last month. The dual signature requirement expired 30 days ago. The bank was legally obligated to process her request without notifying you. She has sole discretionary control over the account now. I stared at the mahogany grain of my desk. The timing was not a coincidence. Trent had not just been planning a wedding. He had been waiting. He had counted down the days until Harper's birthday. He had waited until the legal safeguards fell away, and then he had struck immediately. How much is left in that specific trust, Gregory Voss? I asked, my voice dangerously calm. Gregory hesitated for a fraction of a second before delivering the final devastating blow. After today, he said, there is exactly $3.2 million remaining in liquid assets. And Harrison, without your authorization requirement, every single penny of it is now completely vulnerable. Every single penny of it is now completely vulnerable. I let Gregory's words hang in the air for a long moment. Panic is a luxury that business owners cannot afford. I thanked him, instructed him to monitor the accounts around the clock, and hung up the phone. I did not sit in my study mourning the loss of the money or the manipulation of my daughter. I walked down to the garage, got into my car, and typed the registered address of Trent Lawson's company into the navigation system. Trent claimed he was running a revolutionary artificial intelligence startup. He told Harper he was building the future. I was going to see this future for myself. The drive took me out of the financial district and into the quiet, unassuming suburbs of Boston. As the miles rolled by, my mind drifted back 40 years to my own beginnings. When I started my real estate empire, I did not have a fancy title or a vocabulary full of empty buzzwords. I had a rented desk in a basement office that smelled of damp concrete and cheap coffee. I worked 18 hours a day, negotiating deals on a rotary phone, poring over zoning maps until my eyes blurred. I knew what a real business looked like. It was built on grit, tangible assets, and verifiable ledgers. Trent, however, traded entirely in illusions. He sold concepts, market windows, and venture capital dreams. I turned off the main highway and navigated a series of narrow streets lined with tall trees, searching for the address listed on his corporate filings. I expected to find a sleek corporate park, a modern building with glass facades bustling with young developers and engineers. Instead, the navigation system directed me to a tired gray strip mall tucked behind a dying grocery store. I parked my car and stepped out into the humid afternoon air. The building housed a dry cleaner, a failing martial arts studio, and a small door marked as a shared collaborative workspace. This was the global headquarters of the visionary technology company that required $500,000 of my daughter's inheritance. I pushed open the glass door and walked inside. The lobby was entirely deserted. There was no receptionist, no security guard, and certainly no team of brilliant engineers changing the world. The air conditioning was broken, leaving the room smelling of stale dust and old carpet. I walked down a narrow hallway lined with small glass enclosures. Most of them were completely empty. I checked the directory on the wall. Trent Lawson's company was registered to suite number 12 at the very end of the corridor. As I approached the office, I felt a familiar cold detachment settle over me. I was not a father looking for his future son-in-law. I was an auditor hunting down a fraud. I reached the door of suite 12. It was unlocked. I pushed the door open and stepped inside. The room was no larger than a small storage closet. There was no server rack, no whiteboards covered in complex algorithms, and absolutely no sign of artificial intelligence development. The entire operation consisted of 2 cheap folding tables pushed against the back wall. On top of those tables sat 2 outdated laptop computers, both powered down and covered in a thick, undisturbed layer of dust. A dead potted plant sat in the corner, its brown leaves scattered across the stained carpet. I walked over to the desk and ran my finger across the lid of one of the laptops. The dust clung to my skin, proving that no one had touched this machine in weeks, possibly months. There were no notebooks, no sticky notes, no coffee mugs. It was a phantom office, a hollow shell created solely to secure a business address and a corporate registration number. This was the revolutionary company that Harper had bled her trust fund to save. Trent had sold her a phantom. He had packaged empty air and convinced her it was worth $500,000. I stood in the center of the silent room, analyzing the space. Criminals who operate shell companies always leave a trail, no matter how clever they think they are. They are arrogant, and arrogance breeds carelessness. I began to search the room. I opened the single filing cabinet tucked under the folding table. It was completely empty. I checked the trash can, finding only a few greasy food wrappers. Then I noticed a stack of unopened mail shoved haphazardly into a wire basket on the edge of the desk. Most of the envelopes were standard junk mail, promotional offers, and generic credit card solicitations. But as I sifted through the pile, one envelope caught my eye. It was thicker than the others, stamped with the logo of an international financial institution known for handling offshore accounts. The return address was listed in the Cayman Islands. I did not hesitate. I picked up a plastic letter opener from the desk and sliced the envelope open. I pulled out a thick stack of folded documents. It was not a bank statement or a venture capital investment offer. It was a formal legal notice printed on heavy watermarked paper. I adjusted my glasses and read the bold text at the top of the page. It was a final past due demand for a massive offshore credit line. The primary debtor was listed as Trent Lawson. I scanned the itemized list of penalties and aggressive interest rates accumulating daily. The outstanding balance made my blood run cold. It was for well over $1 million, a terrifying financial black hole. Trent did not need a bridge loan to fund a prototype. He was not building an artificial intelligence platform to change the future. He needed to satisfy a staggering offshore debt before his creditors came collecting. And he was using my daughter's money to save his own life. I folded the notice and placed it in my pocket. I folded the notice and placed it in my pocket. I did not leave the dusty office immediately. I stood there, letting the reality solidify in my mind. Trent Lawson was not just a lazy opportunist. He was a desperate man trapped in a financial corner, using my daughter as a shield. I walked out of the building, locked the glass door, and returned to my car. I sat in the driver's seat and pulled out my phone. I needed to look my enemy in the eye. I needed to see exactly how arrogant he had become now that he believed he had won. I dialed Harper's number, forcing my voice to soften into the tone of a defeated, apologetic father. When she answered, I told her I had thought about our earlier conversation. I told her I wanted to make amends, to understand Trent's vision, and to celebrate their upcoming wedding properly. I invited them to dinner at an exclusive, high-end steakhouse downtown. Harper was overjoyed, her voice practically vibrating with relief. She promised they would be there at 8. I arrived at the restaurant 30 minutes early. I secured a private booth in the back, a quiet space where I could control the environment. When Harper and Trent finally arrived, the dynamic between them was instantly clear. Trent walked a few steps ahead of her, his chest puffed out, wearing a tailored suit that probably cost more than the computers in his fake office. Harper trailed behind him, looking anxious, clutching her purse. Trent slid into the leather booth across from me, spreading his arms wide and taking up as much space as possible. He did not offer a respectful greeting. Instead, he flashed a smug, victorious grin. "Harrison," he said, leaning back, "I am glad you finally came to your senses. It takes a big man to admit when he is stuck in the past." Harper visibly cringed at his tone, placing a gentle hand on his arm, but he simply brushed it away. I kept my face perfectly impassive. I told him I was ready to listen, ready to hear about the future of his company. For the next hour, I sat through the most agonizing performance of my entire life. Trent talked endlessly about his startup, throwing around meaningless jargon. He spoke of synergy, disruptive algorithms, and global scaling, all while sitting on $1 million offshore debt. I nodded thoughtfully, asking mild questions, playing the role of the obsolete real estate dinosaur, eager to learn from the young genius. Trent fed on my feigned ignorance. His ego expanded with every passing minute. When the sommelier approached our table, Trent did not hesitate. He ordered the most expensive bottle of vintage red wine on the menu without even glancing at the price. "We need to celebrate my new bridge loan," he announced loudly. When the waiter brought the bill at the end of the meal, Trent performed a theatrical patting of his pockets. "Oh, honey," he said, looking at Harper with a practiced pout. "I left my primary corporate card at the office. Do you mind grabbing this one? The company accounts are locked up in the transfer period anyway." Harper immediately pulled out her premium credit card and handed it to the waiter. I watched as my daughter paid for a dinner that cost over $1,000, funding the extravagant lifestyle of the man who was actively robbing her. I did not blink. I did not say a word. I simply watched the transaction happen. Trent took a long sip of the expensive wine, swirling it in his glass. He looked at me over the rim, his eyes gleaming with malicious satisfaction. "You know, Harrison," he began, his voice dripping with condescension, "Harper was terrified you would throw a massive tantrum today. She thinks you want to control every aspect of her life. But I told her you would eventually understand. You just needed to see that I am the one taking care of her now. I am the one guiding her future." I placed my hands flat on the table. "You are taking care of her, Trent?" I asked calmly. "Yes," he replied, leaning forward, invading my space. "And frankly, it is about time someone showed her what real support looks like. You have always treated her like a transaction, Harrison. You put conditions on everything. It is sad, really." Harper shifted uncomfortably in her seat, staring down at her lap. Trent reached over and patted her hand condescendingly. "It is okay, babe," he said softly to her, before turning his cold eyes back to me. Carolyn was the only one who truly loved Harper unconditionally. She was the only one in this family who knew how to nurture her without trying to run her life like a corporate merger. It is a tragedy Carolyn is not here for the wedding. She would have gladly handed over whatever we needed without all this pathetic interrogating. The mention of my late wife hung in the air like toxic smoke. Harper gasped quietly, finally realizing Trent had gone too far. "Dad," she whispered, her eyes wide with panic. "I am so sorry. He did not mean it like that." I did not look at my daughter. I kept my gaze locked entirely on Trent Lawson. He sat there drinking wine paid for by my daughter, carrying $1 million secret debt, and daring to use the woman I loved to insult me to my face. He thought he had broken me. He thought invoking her memory would shatter my composure and force me to retreat in emotional defeat. He expected anger tears or a dramatic exit. Instead, I let a slow, cold smile spread across my face. I did not raise my voice. I leaned forward. "You are absolutely right, Trent," I said softly. "Carolyn had a beautiful, trusting heart. She always believed the absolute best in people. But I am not Carolyn." I stood up from the leather booth, leaving my untouched water on the table. I looked down at the man who thought he had just conquered my family. I did not say another word to him. I simply kissed my daughter on the forehead and walked out of the restaurant. The cool night air hit my face as I handed the valet my ticket. The anger I felt earlier had completely vanished, replaced by a profound, terrifying clarity. Trent Lawson had made the fatal mistake of confusing my patience for weakness. He had brought a knife to a gunfight, and he did not even realize the game had changed. I drove back to my estate in absolute silence. I did not sleep that night. Instead, I sat at my desk and compiled every single piece of information I had on Trent. It was not much. A few social media profiles, a generic business registration, and the past due notice from the Cayman Islands. At 6 a.m, I made the call. Victor Thorne did not operate out of a flashy downtown high-rise. His office was in an unmarked brick building surrounded by old warehouses. Victor was a former federal investigator turned forensic accountant and intelligence contractor. He specialized in ruining white-collar criminals. I walked into his austere office at 8 o'clock. There was no receptionist, just Victor behind a steel desk with black coffee between us. He did not offer meaningless pleasantries or ask about my day. He simply poured me a cup of hot coffee and leaned back in his worn leather chair. "Harrison," he said, his voice a low, gravelly hum that commanded instant respect. "You look like a man who is about to ask me to ruin a life." I placed a thick manila folder on the center of his desk. "I want you to dissect a parasite," I replied coldly. "His name is Trent Lawson. He is engaged to my daughter, and he just manipulated her into draining $450,000 from her trust fund." Victor opened the folder with practiced efficiency. He glanced at the meager contents I had managed to gather. A printout of Trent's corporate filing, a few glossy photographs, and the offshore debt notice I took from his office. "Is this all you have?" Victor asked, raising a single skeptical eyebrow. "The man is a ghost," I explained quietly. "His corporate headquarters is an empty closet in a suburban strip mall. There are no employees, no servers, and absolutely no products. Just a mountain of unopened junk mail and a formal demand letter for a massive offshore debt. He told my daughter the money was a bridge loan for his company, but I know it is a lie. I need to know exactly where that $500,000 went the moment it left her account. I need to know who he owes money to in the Cayman Islands. I need to know every dirty hidden corner of his existence. I want bank records, text messages, travel logs, and illegal gambling histories. I want to know what he eats for breakfast and who he lies to before he goes to sleep at night." Victor slowly flipped through the documents, his expression unreadable. He traced his finger over the offshore notice, his dark eyes narrowing as he calculated the sheer magnitude of the financial debt. "This kind of leverage does not come from a few bad investments, Harrison. This comes from sustained, reckless behavior over a long period of time. Men with this kind of offshore exposure are usually desperate, and desperate men are incredibly sloppy." I reached into the inner pocket of my tailored suit jacket and pulled out my personal leather-bound checkbook. I uncapped my gold fountain pen and signed my name at the bottom of a blank check. I slid the small piece of paper across the cold steel desk. Victor looked at the blank amount, then slowly looked up at me. "I do not care what this costs," I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "Hire as many analysts as you possibly need. Bribe whoever you have to bribe to get the truth. Hack whatever digital systems you need to breach to find his secrets. I want Trent Lawson turned completely inside out. I want his financial organs laid bare on this desk. He invoked my late wife's memory last night to mock me. He thinks he has outsmarted me and successfully secured his future. I want to take his entire future away." Victor picked up the check and folded it neatly, placing it carefully in his breast pocket. He did not smile, but a glint of genuine predatory interest flickered in his dark eyes. He leaned forward and folded his hands firmly on the desk. "You will have your answers, Harrison," he said quietly. "I will put my entire forensic team on this case immediately. We will track the wire transfers, pull his complete offshore financial history, and dig up every single skeleton he has tried to bury. But I need you to mentally prepare yourself for what we are going to find." "I am prepared for anything," I replied steadily, not breaking eye contact. Victor shook his head slowly, a grim shadow passing over his face. "With all due respect, Harrison, you are a loving father, and fathers always hold on to a tiny sliver of hope that they are wrong. But let me tell you from 20 years of brutal experience in this exact field, whenever I get hired to investigate a charismatic groom who claims to run a revolutionary tech startup, the story never ends with a simple misunderstanding. It never ends with a failed, well-meaning business venture. It always, without exception, ends in massive federal fraud and total destruction. Give me exactly 48 hours to work my magic. By this time on Friday morning, I will give you everything you need to destroy him." I sat across from Victor Thorne exactly 48 hours later. His austere office had not changed, and neither had his demeanor. He placed a thick black binder on the desk between us. The label on the cover simply read, "Lawson." He did not offer any comforting words or sympathetic gestures. He knew I was not there for therapy. I was there for the autopsy of a lie. Victor poured a fresh cup of coffee, sat back in his chair, and pushed the binder toward me. "Harrison," he began, his voice flat and analytical, "you were right. Trent Lawson is not a tech visionary. He is a financial sinkhole. We tracked the $450,000 from the moment it left your daughter's trust account. It did not go into research and development. It did not go into server space or developer salaries. It went into a complex laundering sequence designed to obscure its final destination. But my analysts are very good at their jobs. We unspooled the entire thread." I opened the binder. The first page was a detailed flowchart mapping a dizzying array of wire transfers offshore, holding accounts and corporate aliases. "Open to tab 3, Victor instructed. I flipped to the designated section. It contained a series of bank statements and ledger printouts. The first major disbursement, Victor explained, pointing to a highlighted column, occurred exactly 12 hours after the funds hit Trent's primary account. He wired $350,000 to a holding company registered in Macau. We dug into the corporate structure of that holding company. It is a known front for one of the largest VIP casino syndicates in Asia. I stared at the numbers. $350,000. That was not a casual weekend in Las Vegas. That was a systemic, catastrophic gambling addiction. He owed them money, I stated, my voice devoid of any inflection. "Exactly," Victor nodded. "He was in deep. Our sources indicate he spent 3 weeks at a high roller table last year, racking up a massive deficit. The syndicate gave him an extension, likely because he showed them proof of his upcoming marriage to an heiress. He leveraged your daughter's net worth to secure his gambling markers. When the deadline hit, he drained Harper's account to save his own skin." I traced the line of the wire transfer on the page. The sheer audacity of it was staggering. Trent had not just stolen from Harper. He had used her as collateral to appease dangerous creditors, and he had done it all while smiling and planning their wedding. "What about the rest of the money?" I asked, turning the page. "There is still $100,000 unaccounted for." Victor's expression tightened slightly. He leaned forward, tapping a different column on the spreadsheet. "This is where the story shifts from pathetic to purely malicious," he said. "The remaining $100,000 did not go to a creditor. It was routed through a domestic shell company registered in Delaware and then deposited directly into a personal checking account right here in Boston." I looked at the name listed on the account. Melissa Vance. The name meant nothing to me. "Who is she?" I asked. Victor flipped the binder to the final tab. It contained a series of photographs and a background check. Melissa Vance, age 30. She works as a high-end real estate broker in the Back Bay area. She lives in a luxury apartment, drives a Range Rover, and has no visible connection to any technology startup. However, we pulled her phone records and travel logs. I looked at the photographs. They showed a striking blonde woman entering various expensive restaurants and hotels. In several of the photos, she was accompanied by a man. The man was Trent Lawson. "She is not a business partner," Victor stated bluntly. "She is his mistress. They have been involved for over 3 years, long before he ever met Harper. According to the financial records we uncovered, Trent has been funneling a steady stream of cash into Melissa's accounts for the duration of their relationship. The $100,000 he stole from your daughter's trust fund was essentially a massive severance package. He paid off his gambling debt, and then he paid off his mistress." I closed the binder slowly, the sound of the thick cardboard snapping shut, echoing in the quiet office. The picture was complete. Trent was not just a desperate man making bad decisions. He was a calculated predator. He had maintained a long-term relationship with another woman while systematically targeting my daughter for her wealth. He had planned this theft meticulously, waiting for the legal safeguards to expire and then executing the transfer to cover his gambling debts and secure his mistress's silence. Victor watched me closely, assessing my reaction. "He has insulated himself very well, Harrison," he warned. "On paper, these transactions look like legitimate business investments and consulting fees. He used complex corporate structures to obscure the origin of the funds. If you go to the authorities right now, it will be a long, drawn-out legal battle. Harper will be dragged through the mud, and Trent will likely argue that the funds were given to him willingly as a gift. He has the paperwork to make it look plausible." "I am not going to the authorities, Victor," I said, my voice steady and cold. "If I go to the police, Trent hires a lawyer, ties up the courts for years, and Harper's money remains frozen or lost entirely. No. The legal system is too slow and too forgiving for a man like Trent Lawson." "What is your play, then?" Victor asked, raising an eyebrow. I picked up the binder and tucked it under my arm. "Trent thinks he is a mastermind," I replied. "He thinks he has outsmarted everyone, secured his future, and eliminated his debts. He believes he holds all the cards. I am going to let him keep believing that, right up until the moment I tear his entire world apart. I need you to keep digging, Victor. I want you to find the pressure points. I want to know exactly how he plans to extract the remaining $3.2 million from Harper's trust. Because I know he is not going to stop at $500,000. Victor nodded slowly, a grim smile playing on his lips. "You are right, Harrison. A parasite never stops feeding until the host is completely dead. I will put a team on the remaining trust assets immediately. We will monitor every communication, every financial inquiry, and every legal document he tries to process." I walked out of the investigator's office and into the harsh morning light. The anger I felt was no longer a burning fire. It had compressed into a dense, unbreakable block of ice. Trent Lawson had stolen my daughter's money to pay off foreign casinos and fund his mistress. He had mocked my late wife's memory and treated me like an obsolete fool. I was not just going to stop him, I was going to utterly dismantle him. Before I even reached the door of my car, my phone vibrated in my pocket. It was Victor. I answered the phone. "Harrison," Victor said, his voice stripped of any preamble. You need to come back upstairs. My team just intercepted a secure email chain that you need to see immediately. It concerns the mistress Melissa and a legal document Trent is currently trying to force your daughter to sign. I did not ask questions. I walked straight back upstairs. Victor was already holding a newly printed stack of papers. The top sheet was a legal draft densely packed with corporate and marital law terminology. We breached Melissa's private email server, Victor explained, handing me the document. Trent has been keeping her updated on his progress. He is not just giving her cash, Harrison. They are coordinating a complete financial extraction. And this document is the final mechanism. I took the papers and adjusted my glasses. It was a draft of a prenuptial agreement. As I read the clauses, the true nature of the document revealed itself. It was a predatory trap meticulously engineered to strip my daughter of her financial independence. Look at Section 4, Victor said, pointing a heavy finger at the center of the page. I read the bold text. It stated that upon marriage, all separate property, including existing trust funds, future inheritances, and real estate, would immediately convert into joint marital assets. Furthermore, in the event of a divorce, Trent would be entitled to exactly 50% of that combined wealth, regardless of the duration of the marriage or the cause of the separation. It was a blank check, granting him half of everything Carolyn and I had spent our lives building. He sent this draft to Melissa last night, Victor said, along with a message saying he is pressuring Harper to sign it by Friday. He told Melissa that once the ink is dry and the marriage is finalized, he will have legal access to the remaining $3.2 million. He plans to funnel the majority of it into a joint account, drain it, and file for divorce within a year. I stared at the black ink on the white paper. The sheer evil of the plan was staggering. Trent was not a simple opportunist who had gotten lucky. He was a professional predator. Now he was leveraging that manipulated trust to coerce her into signing away her entire future. How is he getting her to agree to this? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Harper is naive, but she is not entirely foolish. She has to know this is a bad deal. Victor pulled out another sheet of paper. It was a transcript of text messages between Trent and Harper from earlier that morning. He is using classic emotional extortion, Victor replied. He is framing the prenuptial agreement as a test of her loyalty. He is telling her that true partners share everything and that keeping her trust fund separate means she does not truly believe in their future together. He even threatened to call off the wedding, claiming he cannot marry someone who treats him like a financial liability rather than a husband. The cruelty was surgical. Trent knew exactly how to trigger Harper's deep-seated fear of abandonment. By threatening the wedding, an event she had poured her heart into planning, he was forcing her into a state of panic. In her mind, she was not giving away her fortune. She was saving her relationship. She was proving her love. He is going to bankrupt her, I said softly, the realization settling over me like a heavy shroud. He is not just going to take the $500,000 he already stole. He wants the rest of the trust. He wants the properties she will eventually inherit. He wants everything. And once she is empty, he will abandon her and disappear with Melissa. He will leave her utterly ruined, both financially and emotionally. The betrayal will shatter her completely. I cannot allow Carolyn's daughter to be discarded like garbage by a man who produces absolutely nothing of value. That is exactly the plan, Victor confirmed. And Harrison, because she is now 28, she has the legal capacity to sign this document without your knowledge or consent. If she signs this agreement and walks down that aisle, Trent Lawson will legally own half of her life. And considering the offshore debt he is carrying, those creditors will immediately come after her assets the moment they are merged with his. I placed the prenuptial draft back on Victor's desk. The anger that had been simmering inside me transformed into a cold, terrifying calm. Trent Lawson had crossed a line from which there was no return. He had stopped being a nuisance and had become an existential threat to my family. I was no longer dealing with a greedy fiancé. I was dealing with a parasite actively trying to kill its host. He thinks he has won, I said, my voice echoing in the quiet room. He thinks because he isolated her and bypassed my legal authority, he is untouchable. He thinks I am just going to stand by and watch him destroy my daughter. What do you want me to do? Victor asked, his hands folded on the desk. Keep monitoring their communications, I ordered. I want to know every move he makes, but do not interfere with the prenuptial agreement. Let him keep pushing her. Let him feel victorious. Victor frowned. Harrison, if she signs that paper, the damage will be catastrophic. She can sign whatever she wants, I replied, a ruthless clarity settling in my mind. Because by the time Trent Lawson reaches the altar, that piece of paper will not be worth the ink it is printed on. I will use his unimaginable greed as the weapon that destroys him. I will gladly give him the opportunity to sign the most important contract of his pathetic life. I drove directly from the investigator to the towering glass skyscraper that housed the law offices of Gregory Pierce. I bypassed the receptionist and opened the double doors to Gregory's corner office. He looked up from his desk, his expression shifting to professional alertness when he saw the cold determination in my eyes. I placed the investigative binder onto his desk. I told him that the freeze on the trust fund no longer mattered. I explained that Trent Lawson had stolen $500,000, funneled it to foreign casinos and a local mistress, and was actively coercing Harper into signing a predatory prenuptial agreement. Gregory listened in absolute silence, his hands steepled beneath his chin. When I finished, he reached for his phone to summon his litigation team to file emergency injunctions. I stopped him by placing my hand firmly over his. We are not going to court, I told him. We are going to draft a new contract. I want to buy a company. I said, my voice steady and completely devoid of mercy. I want to purchase Trent Lawson's artificial intelligence startup. Gregory stared at me as if I had lost my mind. He reminded me that the company was a phantom shell, an empty corporate entity with zero assets, zero intellectual property, and zero revenue. He pointed out that acquiring it would mean assuming all of its hidden liabilities, including the massive offshore debt Trent had accumulated in the Cayman Islands. That is exactly the point, I replied. I want to own the debt. I want to own his liabilities. I want to become his sole creditor. I instructed Gregory to draft a master purchase agreement masquerading as an angel investment contract for Trent Lawson. On the surface, the document needed to look like the ultimate wedding gift from a wealthy, supportive father-in-law. It needed to outline a capital injection of exactly $5 million earmarked for research, operational scaling, and global expansion. Trent's ego is his greatest vulnerability, I explained to my attorney. He fancies himself a visionary genius who is constantly misunderstood by the traditional business world. If I hand him a $5 million investment, he will not see a trap. He will see validation. He will see a blank check that proves he finally broke the stubborn old man and secured his financial independence. He will be so utterly blinded by the sheer magnitude of the dollar amount that he will never bother to read the fine print. Gregory slowly lowered his hands, a predatory smile spreading across his face as he began to understand the sheer cruelty of the legal snare we were building. You want to weaponize his own greed against him, Gregory said softly. You want him to eagerly sign his own financial death warrant. I nodded. I told him to make the cover page gleam with golden promises, but to make the underlying clauses an inescapable legal prison. For the next 4 hours, we engineered a masterpiece of corporate destruction. Gregory pulled up the complex templates usually reserved for hostile takeovers and distressed asset acquisitions. We carefully layered the document with dense, impenetrable legal jargon. To the untrained eye, it looked like standard boilerplate language for a high-equity venture capital transfer. But buried deep within the massive 50-page document were the specific clauses that would completely annihilate Trent Lawson. First, the contract stipulated that by accepting the $5 million investment, Trent was not merely selling a minority stake in his company. He was executing a complete transfer of ownership. He was relinquishing total executive control, all voting rights, and all corporate autonomy to me. More importantly, Gregory structured the liability assumption clause with brutal precision. The contract explicitly stated that the acquiring party, which was me, would absorb the corporate entity in its entirety. However, a subclause deeply embedded in Section 42 mandated that the original founder, Trent Lawson, remained personally, unconditionally liable for any undisclosed offshore debts, gambling markers, and fraudulent wire transfers executed prior to the acquisition date. I was buying his company, but I was legally binding the criminal debt directly to his personal Social Security number. We created a legal mechanism that would force Trent to hand me the keys to his fake empire while keeping the crushing weight of the $1 million Cayman Islands debt squarely on his own shoulders. But we were not finished. I told Gregory to insert the ultimate failsafe. We drafted a sweeping waiver of marital assets. The document declared that in exchange for the $5 million capital injection, Trent voluntarily and irrevocably renounced any current or future claims to the assets, trust funds, real estate, and inheritances belonging to Harper Cole. This powerful clause was explicitly designed to completely override and immediately invalidate the predatory prenuptial agreement he was trying to force my daughter to sign. The waiver was absolute. It meant that even if he married Harper, he would never be able to touch a single penny of her money again. He was trading his access to her wealth for a $5 million phantom investment. Gregory typed furiously, his eyes scanning the monitors as he finalized the lethal fine print. He cross-referenced every single state statute to ensure the contract was entirely airtight and immune to any future litigation. "This is a masterpiece of corporate sabotage," Harrison Gregory whispered as he hit the print command. The heavy laser printer hummed to life, spitting out the thick stack of legal documents that would serve as Trent's financial guillotine. Gregory gathered the warm papers, tapped them perfectly square on the mahogany desk, and slid them into a dark leather portfolio. He looked up at me, his expression deadly serious. "By signing this document, he is selling you his fake company, cementing his own offshore bankruptcy, and legally walling himself off from Harper's fortune forever. The trap is set. Right now, you just have to make him take the bait." I left Gregory's office with the heavy leather portfolio tucked securely under my arm. The legal trap was perfectly constructed, but a trap is entirely useless if the prey refuses to step inside. I needed to become the defeated, obsolete old man who had finally realized he was no match for the brilliant young visionary. I picked up my phone and sent a brief text message to Trent asking if he had time for a private drink at my country club that evening. He replied within 3 minutes. He agreed to meet me, eager to gloat over my apparent surrender. I arrived at the club early and secured a private room. When Trent walked through the heavy mahogany doors, he looked like a man who had already conquered the world. He wore a tailored navy suit and carried himself with an insufferable swagger. He simply unbuttoned his jacket, dropped into the armchair across from me, and crossed his legs. He looked at me with a mixture of pity and triumph. I ordered 2 glasses of our finest scotch, waiting until the waiter closed the door behind us before I began my performance. I took a slow breath, letting my shoulders slump forward, forcing my posture to project exhaustion and defeat. I finally looked him in the eye. "Trent." I began, keeping my voice low and weary. "I asked you here tonight because I need to apologize. I have spent the last few weeks fighting you, questioning your methods, and doubting your vision. When Carolyn passed away, I became terrified of losing Harper. I looked at your business through the lens of a commercial real estate developer who only understands bricks and mortar. I did not understand the agility required to build an artificial intelligence platform. I was an old, out-of-touch father trying to apply outdated rules to a modern genius." Trent took a slow sip of his scotch, failing to hide the massive, arrogant smile spreading across his face. "It takes a lot of courage to admit that," Harrison Trent said smoothly. "I told Harper you would eventually come around. You just needed time to process the paradigm shift. But I am not holding a grudge. I am glad you are finally ready to step aside and let us build our life." I nodded meekly, keeping my expression perfectly subdued. "I appreciate your understanding, Trent," I replied. "In fact, seeing how decisively you secured that bridge loan from Harper's Trust was a massive wake-up call for me. It made me realize that you are willing to take bold, aggressive risks to ensure your company succeeds. And that is exactly why I want to back your vision properly." Trent paused, his glass hovering inches from his mouth. He narrowed his eyes slightly. "What do you mean by backing my vision properly?" he asked. I leaned forward. "I do not want you scraping by on temporary bridge loans," I said softly. "Harper loves you, and she believes in your company. If she believes in you, then as her father, it is my duty to support you fully. I want to become your primary angel investor. I want to inject $5 million into your startup, clear your operational runway, and give you the resources you need to absolutely dominate the market." The scotch sloshed in Trent's glass as his hand twitched. The arrogant smirk vanished, replaced by an expression of pure, unadulterated shock. $5 million, Trent whispered. He stared at me, his pupils dilated, his mind racing, as he calculated what that amount of money would do for him. I knew exactly what was flashing behind his eyes. He was seeing the end of his offshore debts. He was seeing absolute financial freedom funded entirely by the old fool sitting across from him. "Yes," I confirmed calmly. $5 million. "But I have one condition, Trent. I want this to be a surprise for Harper. I have drafted a comprehensive investment contract. I want us to meet privately in the Groom's suite on the day of the wedding, just before the ceremony. We will sign the paperwork there, as two men forging a new family legacy. Once the ink is dry, we will announce the investment to Harper and the guests during the reception." I pulled a single sheet of paper from my inner jacket pocket and placed it on the table between us. It was not the full contract, just an executive summary document, designed to look incredibly official. It highlighted the $5 million figure in bold ink, alongside generous terms that seemed to give him complete operational control. I watched his eyes dart across the page. He was reading the numbers, but his brain was completely skipping over the legal mechanisms governing the transfer. I told him Gregory was finalizing the full document and that it would be ready on Saturday. The sheer presentation of the summary was enough to shatter any remaining skepticism he might have harbored. Trent was practically salivating across the table. His greed had completely hijacked his critical thinking. He did not ask to see the contract in advance. He did not question why an experienced businessman would hand over $5 million in a groom's suite an hour before a wedding. He only saw the money and the validation of his own inflated ego. "Harrison, that is incredible." Trent beamed, leaning forward to enthusiastically shake my hand. "You have my word. I will be in the suite ready to sign. We are going to make history together." I smiled warmly, projecting the image of a proud father-in-law. Inside, my heart was completely made of ice. The bait had been taken, swallowed whole by a man blinded by his own insatiable appetite. Trent eagerly agreed to a private meeting on the wedding day to sign the investment paperwork. He believed he was walking into a coronation. He had absolutely no idea he had just cheerfully scheduled his own execution. 2 days before the wedding, the frantic energy of preparation consumed my entire estate. Caterers were confirming menus, florists were delivering samples, and my daughter Harper was a whirlwind of nervous excitement. I played my part perfectly. I smiled, I paid the incoming invoices, and I acted like a father who had finally accepted his future son-in-law. But beneath that carefully constructed facade, I was simply waiting for the final piece of ammunition. I was waiting for Victor Thorne. My private phone vibrated on my mahogany desk just after 9 in the evening. The caller identification displayed Victor's name. I walked over to the heavy oak doors of my home office, closed them firmly, and turned the brass lock. I answered the call. Victor did not offer a greeting. He simply told me that his surveillance team had just hit the mother lode. He said he was sending an encrypted audio file to my secure email server immediately. He warned me that the contents were highly disturbing and that I needed to prepare myself before pressing play. I told him I was ready for whatever he had found. The email arrived 3 seconds later. It contained a single audio attachment and a brief message noting that the recording had been captured via a compromised microphone in Melissa's luxury vehicle earlier that afternoon. I downloaded the file, connected my high-fidelity headphones to the computer, and sat back in my leather chair. I turned off the main overhead lights, leaving only the soft amber glow of my desk lamp illuminating the room. I took a deep breath, steadying my heart rate, and pressed play. The recording began with the muffled sound of a car engine and the rhythmic clicking of a turn signal. Then the voice of Trent Lawson filled my ears. He sounded relaxed, confident, and entirely stripped of the fake visionary persona he wore around my family. He was speaking to Melissa. She asked him how the wedding preparations were going and if the old man was still causing trouble. Trent laughed. It was a cruel, grating sound that made my jaw clench. He told her that the old man had completely folded. He bragged about how easy it was to manipulate me, claiming that I was so desperate to keep my daughter happy that I was literally handing him the keys to the kingdom. He said he had completely broken my resistance. Melissa asked about the money, specifically the remainder of the trust fund. She wanted to know the exact timeline for their ultimate payout. The next words out of Trent's mouth were so profoundly vile that they seemed to lower the temperature in my office by 10 degrees. He told her not to worry about the timeline because the naive cash cow was completely under his spell. That was the exact phrase he used to describe my daughter, a naive cash cow. He said Harper was so desperate for validation and romantic love that she would sign anything he put in front of her without reading a single paragraph. He outlined his entire scheme with terrifying precision. He explained that the $5 million investment I had promised him was just the appetizer. Once they were legally married, he planned to use his position as her husband to gradually liquidate the remaining $3.2 million in her primary accounts. He told Melissa they would transfer the funds into a series of decentralized offshore portfolios under the guise of aggressive real estate investments. He laughed again, mocking my career, saying he was going to use my own industry to steal my family fortune. Melissa asked what would happen when Harper finally realized the money was gone. Trent did not hesitate. He said he would simply file for divorce. He explained that by the time she figured out the accounts were completely empty, the prenuptial agreement would ensure she had no legal recourse. He planned to blame the financial losses on market volatility and bad business advice. He told Melissa they would take the money, relocate to a tax haven, and leave Harper completely bankrupt and emotionally devastated. He said she was too soft to ever fight back, and that she would probably spend the rest of her life blaming herself for the failure of their marriage. The recording ended with the sound of them planning a luxurious vacation to the Mediterranean to celebrate their impending wealth. The audio cut out, leaving me in suffocating silence. I sat frozen in the dim light of my office. My hands gripped the armrests of my chair so tightly that my knuckles had turned completely white. For a moment, the sheer magnitude of the betrayal threatened to break my composure. He was not just planning to steal from her. He was planning to destroy her soul. He was going to dismantle her trust in humanity, strip her of her dignity, and leave her with nothing but a broken heart and an empty bank account. I removed the headphones. My anger did not explode into rage. It became much more dangerous. It crystallized. It solidified into absolute impenetrable ice. Any tiny fragment of mercy I harbored evaporated completely. Trent Lawson was a terminal disease, and I was the only cure. He thought he had outsmarted a clueless old man. He thought the wedding would secure his financial independence forever. He had no idea I had already built the trap and baited it with his own greed. I looked at the clock. There were exactly 48 hours left until the ceremony. I opened the master purchase agreement Gregory had drafted. I reviewed the lethal clauses one final time. I did not feel sadness anymore. I felt no grief for the ruined wedding. I only felt the cold anticipation of a predator. I turned off the desk lamp. Trent Lawson chose total destruction, and I would ensure he was the only casualty. I stood up, ready to execute the final phase. I left my dark office and walked into the bright hallway of my home. The contrast was jarring. While I had just heard a man plot the financial ruin of my daughter, the house was vibrating with the frantic energy of a wedding celebration. I held my phone in my hand. The audio file containing Trent Lawson's confessions was queued up on the screen. All I had to do was walk downstairs, press play, and let the truth echo through the foyer. I descended the grand staircase, my footsteps heavy on the carpeted runner. I saw Harper in the main living room. She was surrounded by massive displays of white hydrangeas and pale pink roses. Her wedding planner was rapidly pointing out slight variations in the floral arrangements. Harper looked overwhelmed. She was nervously chewing on her lower lip, a habit she carried since childhood, whenever she felt expectations pressing down on her. Her eyes darted between the flowers and the planner, trying to make everything perfect for the man who was actively mocking her behind her back. I stood in the shadow of the archway, perfectly still, watching my only child. The urge to intervene was almost overwhelming. My paternal instinct screamed at me to march into that room, banish the wedding planner, wrap my arms around my daughter, and play the recording. I wanted to save her the immediate embarrassment of a ruined wedding day. I wanted to spare her the public spectacle. I took a step forward, my thumb hovering over the play button on my device. But then I stopped. I forced my analytical mind to override my emotional heart. I had spent decades studying human behavior in high-stakes negotiations. I knew how people reacted when they were presented with devastating information that contradicted their deeply held beliefs. They rarely accepted the truth immediately. Instead, they panicked. They searched for excuses. They clung to the comforting lie because the reality was simply too painful to bear. If I walked into that living room right now and played the audio file, Harper would undoubtedly be horrified. She would cry. She would demand answers. But then she would call Trent. That would be the fatal mistake. Trent was a master manipulator. He had spent months carefully isolating her, eroding her confidence, and positioning himself as the only person who truly understood her. He had already convinced her that I was a controlling, outdated tyrant who wanted to ruin her happiness out of spite. I pictured the exact scenario playing out in my head. Harper would confront him with the recording, her voice trembling. Trent would not confess. Criminals like him never fold when confronted with partial pressure. He would act incredibly offended. He would tell her that I had hired professionals to fabricate the audio. He would use his tech startup background to spin a convincing lie about artificial intelligence voice cloning, claiming that I was so desperate to stop the wedding that I had stooped to creating a digital forgery. He would play the victim. He would look into her eyes, swear his undying love, and tell her that this was the ultimate test of their relationship. And the most terrifying part was that Harper might actually believe him. Her codependency ran deep. She had invested so much of her identity, her pride, and her heart into this relationship that turning back now would feel like a monumental failure. If Trent managed to plant even a single seed of doubt in her mind about the authenticity of the recording, she would latch onto it. She would choose his comforting lie over my devastating truth. She would forgive him, the wedding would proceed, and I would be entirely banished from her life for trying to sabotage her happiness. I would lose my daughter forever, and Trent would walk away with every penny she owned. I slipped my phone back into my pocket. The realization was bitter and agonizing, but it was absolutely undeniable. I could not save Harper from the pain of a broken heart. The damage was already done the moment she fell in love with a predator. My job now was not to shield her from the emotional fallout. My job was to protect her future, to secure her assets, and to ensure that Trent Lawson was eradicated from her life so thoroughly that he could never return. To do that, the illusion had to be shattered in a way that left absolutely no room for gaslighting or manipulation. Trent had to hang himself with his own rope. He needed to feel completely victorious. He needed to believe that his grand scheme had worked perfectly right up until the very last second. He needed to sign that $5 million contract of his own free will, blinded by his own insatiable greed. I watched Harper gently touch the petals of a white rose, a soft, hopeful smile finally breaking through her anxiety. My chest tightened with profound sorrow. I knew that in exactly 48 hours her entire world was going to violently collapse. She was going to cry. She was going to feel humiliated, betrayed, and completely broken. She would probably hate me for a time, blaming me for allowing the spectacle to happen. But a surgeon cannot be afraid to make a deep incision if it is the only way to remove a lethal tumor. Trent Lawson was a cancer feeding on my family. You do not negotiate with cancer. You do not treat it with half measures or gentle conversations. You cut it out completely, aggressively, and without mercy. I turned away from the living room and walked quietly back down the hallway, leaving my daughter to her flowers. The wedding would proceed exactly as planned. I would let Trent walk all the way to the altar. I would let him put on his tuxedo smile for the cameras and revel in his perceived triumph. I would wait for the final moments. The morning of the wedding arrived with a crisp sky that felt too bright for the destruction I was about to unleash. The venue was the Waldorf Astoria, a monument to historic wealth and undeniable prestige. I paid an astronomical sum to secure their grandest ballroom, a space adorned with cascading crystal chandeliers, towering marble columns, and intricate gold leaf detailing. It was the perfect stage for a high society coronation, which made it the perfect stage for an execution. I walked through the heavily polished brass doors just after 10 o'clock in the morning, projecting the absolute calm of a proud father. Coordinators rushed past me with clipboards and frantic expressions, orchestrating an army of florists, caterers, and lighting specialists. They were all completely focused on ensuring that Harper had the fairy tale wedding she had always dreamed of. I smiled warmly at them, offering words of encouragement and handing out generous cash tips to the lead staff. I played the benevolent patriarch flawlessly. Nobody in that building had the slightest inkling that I was not there to oversee a marriage. I was there to oversee a demolition. While Harper remained hidden away in the bridal suite with her bridesmaids and makeup artists, I slipped away from the main floor and navigated the service corridors until I found the primary audiovisual control room. It was a small, windowless space packed with sound mixing boards and video projection equipment. The lead technician, a young man who looked entirely too stressed for his age, stood up nervously when I entered. I closed the heavy acoustic door behind me and handed him a sealed envelope containing $5,000 in crisp, unmarked bills. I instructed him to ask no questions and follow my commands when the time came. I handed him a secure, encrypted flash drive. I told him to connect it to the main projection system and route the visual feed to the massive screens behind the main stage. I made him run a diagnostic test to ensure the audio would bypass the standard volume limiters and echo through the ballroom with absolute clarity. The technician swallowed hard, nodded, and locked the drive into his primary console. My digital ammunition was now loaded into the venue's infrastructure, waiting for a single signal from my phone to detonate. With the technical trap fully secured, I returned to the grand lobby. The heavy revolving doors were already spinning, admitting the first arrivals of our 158 guests. This was a carefully curated list of Boston's elite. There were real estate developers, investment bankers, local politicians, and prominent socialites. They were the exact demographic that Trent Lawson wanted to impress. They were the audience he needed to validate his fabricated existence as a tech visionary. I greeted them one by one, shaking hands, exchanging polite pleasantries, and accepting their congratulations. My tailored tuxedo fit perfectly, masking the cold, calculating tension tightening every muscle in my body. Just before the pre-ceremony cocktail hour officially began, I spotted Gregory Pierce entering through the side doors. My attorney did not look like a man attending a celebration. He wore a dark, severe suit and carried the heavy black leather portfolio tightly under his arm. He moved through the crowd with the focused efficiency of a shark swimming through a school of oblivious fish. We met near the coat check, away from the prying eyes of the guests. Gregory did not smile. He simply tapped the leather portfolio and gave me a single, slow nod. The $5 million investment contract was finalized, perfectly printed and legally bulletproof. The final trap was physically in the building. Gregory informed me that the notary was waiting discreetly in the business center down the hall, ready to witness the signatures. He also confirmed that Victor Thorne had stationed 4 plainclothes security contractors at the main exits. No one was going to leave this hotel until I allowed it. I thanked Gregory and told him to wait near the groom's suite. It was almost time to make our offer. I turned my attention back to the grand ballroom. The cocktail hour was in full swing, a symphony of clinking champagne glasses and soft string music. I stood near the edge of the room and watched Trent Lawson work the crowd. He was in his absolute element. He wore a custom tuxedo that fit him with razor-sharp precision. He held a glass of expensive champagne in one hand, gesturing expansively as he held court among a group of prominent venture capitalists. He was laughing loudly, projecting the supreme confidence of a man who believed he had successfully secured his fortune. I watched him smoothly transition from one group of wealthy investors to another, telling his lies, selling his phantom company, and basking in the unearned respect of my peers. He looked so incredibly victorious. He looked like a man who had manipulated a naive girl, outsmarted her wealthy father, and won the ultimate prize. Trent caught my eye from across the room. He raised his champagne glass slightly in my direction, flashing a smug, knowing smile. He thought we shared a secret. He thought that in less than an hour we would meet in a private room, and I would hand him the keys to a $5 million empire. He thought his massive financial troubles were finally over forever. I returned his smile with a slow, polite nod. I did not feel angry as I looked at him. I felt a chilling sense of absolute power. Trent was charming, the room soaking in the admiration of 158 high society guests, completely oblivious to the legal and financial slaughter waiting for him in the groom's suite. I watched him take another sip of his champagne, savoring his perceived victory, while I stood in the shadows, silently savoring the undeniable truth that I was watching this man enjoy the very final hour of his freedom. 45 minutes before the ceremony was scheduled to begin, I gave Gregory the signal. I stepped away from the grand ballroom, leaving the chatter and the clinking glasses behind, and made my way toward the private executive suites on the second floor. The thick carpeting absorbed the sound of my footsteps, amplifying the heavy rhythmic thud of my own heartbeat. Gregory was already waiting for me near the elevators, standing perfectly still, with the dark leather portfolio held firmly against his side. We did not exchange a single word. We simply walked side by side down the quiet gilded hallway until we reached the heavy mahogany doors of the groom's suite. I knocked twice, a firm, authoritative sound that echoed loudly in the empty corridor. The door swung open a moment later. Trent stood before us looking like a man who had already conquered the universe. He had removed his tuxedo jacket and unbuttoned his collar, projecting an air of relaxed, effortless power. Behind him, 3 of his groomsmen were laughing loudly, passing around a bottle of overpriced whiskey. Trent's eyes immediately locked onto the leather portfolio tucked under Gregory's arm. A flash of pure, unadulterated greed illuminated his face, quickly masked by a practiced smile of humble gratitude. "Harrison," he said, gesturing broadly for us to enter. "Come in." We were just calming the pre-wedding nerves. I stepped into the room, projecting the image of a solemn, deeply respectful father. I looked at the groomsmen and politely requested that they give us a few moments of absolute privacy. They quickly gathered their glasses and filed out into the hallway, leaving the 3 of us alone in the opulent suite. I turned to Trent, letting out a long, heavy sigh, designed to convey a profound sense of surrender. "Trent," began, keeping my voice low and earnest. "I told you that I wanted to make this right. I told you that I wanted to back your vision properly, without hesitation and without my outdated reservations. I brought Gregory here today to facilitate that transition. I want you to walk down that aisle knowing that your financial future is completely secure and that you have the unrestricted capital you need to change the industry." Gregory stepped forward and placed the leather portfolio onto the center of a large glass coffee table. He unzipped the case with a smooth, practiced motion and extracted the dense 50-page master purchase agreement. He laid it flat on the glass, placing a heavy gold pen right beside it. "This is the angel investment contract," Gregory explained, his tone strictly professional, betraying absolutely no emotion. "As discussed, it outlines the immediate injection of $5 million into your corporate entity. It covers the operational scaling, the strategic expansion, and the complete capitalization of your platform. We have streamlined the executive transfer protocols to ensure the funds are available to you as soon as the banking algorithms process the signatures." Trent did not even wait for Gregory to finish his sentence. He practically lunged toward the coffee table. He eagerly picked up the document, his hands visibly trembling with pure anticipation. I watched his eyes scan the cover page. He clearly saw his name. He saw the name of his artificial intelligence startup. And most importantly, he saw the bold, unmistakable print highlighting the $5 million investment. He stared at that number as if it were a religious artifact. He was completely captivated by the illusion of his own success. "Are there any specific operational restrictions I need to be aware of?" Trent asked, attempting to sound like a seasoned executive conducting due diligence. He flipped to the second page, but his eyes were glazing over the dense, impenetrable legal jargon. I smiled warmly, a fatherly expression that masked the absolute venom in my soul. "I want you to have complete autonomy." "Trent," I lied smoothly. "The legal language is extensive primarily to satisfy federal tax regulations and to structure the corporate transition smoothly. It ensures that the capital injection moves without raising unnecessary bureaucratic flags. My goal is to empower you, not to restrict you. I trust your vision." That was all he needed to hear. Trent did not flip to page 12, where the liability assumption clause securely chained his $1 million offshore debt to his personal Social Security number. He did not flip to page 34, where the marital asset waiver explicitly stripped him of any future claim to Harper's fortune. He was a man starving for validation and drowning in secret debt, and I had just handed him a $5 million life raft. His ego completely blinded his critical thinking. He did not see the cage because he was too focused on the gold-painted bars. "This is monumental," Harrison Trent said, his voice thick with genuine emotion. "I promise you, this investment will yield returns that will make real estate look like child's play. You are making the smartest financial decision of your entire life." "I know I am," I replied softly. Trent picked up the gold pen. He did not hesitate for another second. He pressed the nib to the signature line on the final page and signed his name with a massive, arrogant flourish. He pushed the document across the glass table toward Gregory, exhaling a long breath of absolute relief. He truly believed he had won. Gregory picked up the document. He pulled a brass notary stamp from his pocket and pressed it firmly onto the paper, sealing the legal trap with a heavy, definitive thud. He signed his own name as the official witness gathered the 50 pages and slid them back into the dark leather portfolio. He zipped it shut with a sharp final sound. The transaction was complete. Trent Lawson had just legally sold me his debts, surrendered his rights to my daughter's wealth, and handed me the executioner's axe. The trap had officially sprung, and he was completely locked inside. Gregory tucked the portfolio under his arm and gave me a final imperceptible nod before slipping out of the suite. I followed closely behind him, leaving Trent and his groomsmen to celebrate their phantom victory. The heavy doors closed, shutting away the sound of their triumphant laughter. I walked down the carpeted hallway and descended the grand staircase, stepping back into the opulent reality of the Waldorf Astoria. The pre-ceremony cocktail reception was already in full swing. The ballroom was a sea of silk diamonds and tailored suits. Waiters moved through the crowd carrying silver trays of vintage champagne and delicate hors d'oeuvres. The string quartet played a lively, elegant melody that floated perfectly above the murmur of 158 high society guests. I took my seat at the reserved family table near the front of the stage. Harper was there, looking absolutely breathtaking in her white lace gown. But beneath the layers of expensive makeup and the perfectly arranged veil, I could still see the tightly coiled anxiety in her shoulders. She was nervously watching the doors, waiting for the man who was actively plotting her ruin. A few moments later, the heavy oak doors swung open, and Trent made his grand entrance. He did not walk into the ballroom. He paraded into it. He had discarded his earlier pretense of humility entirely. He strutted across the marble floor with the puffed-out chest of a conquering emperor returning from a victorious campaign. In his mind, he had just secured $5 million. He believed he had broken the stubborn, wealthy father-in-law and cemented his own financial independence. He grabbed a glass of champagne from a passing waiter and took a long, greedy swallow. He began working the room again, but his demeanor had shifted. He was no longer just charming the venture capitalists and the real estate developers. He was acting like he owned them. He slapped men on the back a little too hard. He laughed a little too loudly. The alcohol was clearly catching up to him and stripping away the last remaining layers of his carefully constructed, polite facade. I watched him from my seat, my expression carved out of stone. Every obnoxious laugh, every arrogant gesture only confirmed that my absolute lack of mercy was entirely justified. The string quartet smoothly transitioned into a softer melody, signaling that the ceremony would soon begin in the adjoining hall. The wedding planner began discreetly moving through the crowd, attempting to usher the guests toward the grand arches. But Trent was not ready to relinquish the spotlight. He wanted to bask in the glow of his perceived triumph. He walked over to the small staging area where the musicians were set up. He reached out and pulled the microphone from its heavy brass stand. He tapped the metallic grill twice, the sharp, percussive sound echoing loudly through the massive ballroom speakers. The room immediately fell silent. 158 faces turned toward the stage. Harper stood up from her chair, her hands clasping her bouquet so tightly her knuckles turned white. She looked confused and terrified. This was not in the schedule. Trent raised his champagne glass high into the air, swaying just a fraction of an inch as the alcohol fueled his monumental ego. He smiled down at the crowd, soaking in their undivided attention. "Thank you all for being here today," Trent projected, his voice booming through the sound system. "We are just minutes away from the main event, but before we walk down that aisle, I wanted to say a few words. I wanted to make a toast to the future." He paced slowly across the stage, looking out over the sea of wealthy guests. "You know, building a life, much like building a revolutionary technology company, requires bold vision. It requires shaking off the old ways of doing things." He stopped pacing and locked his eyes onto me. He pointed his glass toward my table. "I want to specifically thank my future father-in-law, Harrison Cole. Harrison built a great real estate business back in the day. But we all know that bricks and mortar are the past. Software, artificial intelligence, innovation, that is the future. And sometimes the old guard has a hard time letting go. Sometimes a relic of the past has to be pushed a little before he learns to step aside for the future." He paused, letting the insult hang heavily in the air. But today, Trent continued, his voice dripping with condescending triumph. Harrison finally realized that his outdated methods do not work anymore. He finally accepted that I am the one steering this ship now. He stepped aside, and I am grateful for his eventual cooperation. "To the future," he shouted, raising his glass. The ballroom remained suspended in a tense, awkward silence for a brief moment. Harper looked absolutely horrified. She sank back into her chair, her face burning with profound embarrassment. Yet she remained completely silent. She did not stand up. She did not defend me. Her codependency kept her frozen, terrified of angering the man on the stage. Then the tension broke. A few of the younger tech executives in the crowd began to chuckle. The laughter spread, a polite, wealthy murmuring that dismissed the blatant disrespect as mere corporate banter or youthful arrogance. They raised their glasses, joining in the toast, completely oblivious to the fact that they were cheering for a criminal. Trent beamed, drinking the rest of his champagne in one triumphant gulp. He looked down at me, expecting to see a defeated, humiliated old man breaking under the weight of public mockery. I did not give him that satisfaction. I did not frown. I did not show anger. I remained seated at my table, perfectly still, my hands resting calmly on my lap. I looked straight into his eyes with the cold, unblinking patience of a predator watching a snare snap shut. The applause for Trent began to die down, replaced by the low, murmuring hum of 158 guests. Trent stood on the edge of the low stage, practically glowing with the intoxicating thrill of his own perceived victory. He held his empty champagne flute in one hand and had somehow managed to acquire a full glass of dark red wine in the other. I knew this was the exact moment I needed to move. I unbuttoned my suit jacket, pushed my chair back from the family table, and stood up. The fabric of my tailored tuxedo felt heavy against my shoulders, but my mind was entirely weightless. I began to walk toward the microphone. I did not rush. My footsteps were measured and deliberate. I kept my gaze locked on the stage, projecting the image of a father who was simply going up to offer a few polite words of congratulations. The guests seated at the tables near the aisle parted slightly, making way for me. Some of them offered sympathetic, tight-lipped smiles, clearly uncomfortable with the blatant disrespect Trent had just thrown my way during his toast. Others simply watched with mild curiosity, waiting to see how the obsolete old man would respond to being publicly humiliated by the young visionary. As I approached the 3 shallow wooden steps leading up to the stage, Trent began to descend. We were on a collision course, moving toward each other on the narrow pathway between the lavish floral arrangements. He was holding his full glass of red wine loosely, a smug grin plastered across his face. I stepped to the right to allow him room to pass, maintaining a respectful distance. But Trent did not want me to pass peacefully. He wanted a spectacular public spectacle. He wanted to cement his absolute dominance before the entire room. Just as we drew level with one another, Trent deliberately shifted his weight. I saw his eyes dart downward for a fraction of a second, calculating the distance. He shot his left foot out directly into my path and simultaneously lunged forward, feigning a sudden, clumsy stumble. The movement was entirely intentional, executed with the malicious precision of a schoolyard bully. His shoulder slammed hard into my chest, knocking me off balance. At the exact same moment, he violently jerked his wrist forward. The contents of his glass did not just spill. The dark red wine was thrown forcefully directly into my face and across my chest. The shock of the cold liquid hitting my skin was instantaneous. The heavy crimson wine splashed across my forehead, burning my eyes and running down my cheeks in thick, sticky streams. It soaked into the crisp white cotton of my dress shirt, blooming into a massive, undeniable stain that ruined the expensive silk lapels of my tuxedo jacket. The sharp, acidic smell of fermented grapes and alcohol immediately filled my nose, suffocating me with its pungent odor. I stumbled backward, my leather shoes slipping slightly on the polished marble floor, but I managed to catch myself before I fell completely. I stood there dripping wet, the red liquid dripping from my chin and soaking heavily into my collar. For 2 agonizing seconds, the grand ballroom of the Waldorf Astoria was plunged into absolute, terrified silence. The string quartet abruptly stopped playing. The waiters froze in their tracks. 158 high society guests gasped in unison, the collective intake of breath sucking all the air out of the massive room. Then the silence broke. It did not break with outcries of concern or rushes of assistance. It broke with laughter. It started as a muffled snicker from the table where Trent's groomsmen were seated, and then it spread. A wave of cruel, polite chuckling echoed through the crowd. They thought it was a hilarious accident. They thought it was the perfect comedic ending to Trent's triumphant speech. The obsolete old man had not just been verbally put in his place. He had been physically disgraced. I slowly wiped the wine from my eyes, blinking away the stinging sensation, and looked directly at the family table. I looked at my daughter. Harper was sitting frozen in her chair. Her face was ashen, her eyes wide with horror. Her hands were clamped tightly over her mouth. She saw exactly what had happened. She saw that it was not an accident. But she did not stand up. She did not rush to my side to offer me a napkin. She did not turn to Trent and demand to know what he had done to her father. Her profound codependency kept her completely paralyzed. She was so terrified of angering Trent, so terrified of ruining the aesthetic perfection of her wedding day, that she chose to remain seated in silence while I stood dripping and humiliated in front of her friends. That was the moment any lingering trace of paternal guilt vanished from my soul. Her inaction proved everything I needed to know. Trent quickly reached out, grabbing my shoulders with both hands, in a highly exaggerated theatrical display of concern. He put on a mask of profound shock for the audience, pretending to stabilize me. "Oh, Harrison, I am so incredibly sorry," he announced loudly, ensuring that his voice carried across the room to the guests. "I just lost my footing. I am so clumsy today. The nerves must be getting to me." He pulled me close, trapping me in a tight, forceful embrace that looked like an apology to the crowd. But as his face pressed against the side of my head, his entire demeanor shifted. The fake concern melted away instantly. I could smell the stale champagne on his breath as he leaned his mouth directly against my ear. His grip on my shoulders tightened painfully, his fingers digging into the wet fabric of my ruined suit. He let out a low, venomous chuckle. "Finally, this is what you deserve," he whispered. He pulled back from the embrace, his hands dropping from my shoulders as he stepped away to admire his work. The faint, cruel smirk remained plastered across his lips, visible only to me. He waited for my reaction. He wanted me to scream. He wanted me to swing a fist at him, to validate his narrative that I was an unstable, controlling old man ruining his daughter's beautiful day. He wanted me to unravel completely in front of Boston's elite. I did not give him a single ounce of that satisfaction. I did not clench my jaw, and I did not narrow my eyes. I simply stood there, letting the cold, heavy liquid drip from my chin onto the immaculate marble floor. The scattered chuckles from the audience quickly died down, replaced by a thick, suffocating silence. The guests began to realize that the situation was no longer a light-hearted accident. The tension in the grand ballroom tightened like a piano wire ready to snap. A young waiter rushed forward from the edge of the room, his eyes wide with panic. He held out a crisp white linen napkin with a trembling hand. I turned to him and offered a small, polite smile. "Thank you," I said softly, my voice perfectly steady. I took the napkin and began to dab the dark wine from my forehead, my cheeks, and my neck. I moved with slow, deliberate precision. I folded the stained cloth neatly and handed it back to the waiter. Then I turned my attention back to the man standing in front of me. Trent had lost his smug grin. The absolute lack of rage on my face was clearly confusing him. Bullies thrive on the emotional reactions of their victims, and I was giving him nothing but a terrifying void. I stepped forward, closing the distance between us. Before he could register my movement, I reached out and firmly gripped the microphone he was still holding in his right hand. I did not yank it away forcefully. I simply took it from him with the undeniable authority of a man who owned the room. Trent blinked his fingers, loosening their grip in sheer surprise. He stepped back, unsure of what was happening. I turned to face the crowd. 158 high society guests stared back at me in breathless anticipation. Even the catering staff had stopped moving. I raised the microphone to my lips. My voice, deep and resonant, echoed flawlessly through the massive sound system, reaching every single corner of the opulent space. "Please do not be alarmed." I began keeping my tone exceptionally warm and conversational. Accidents happen. As Trent so eloquently pointed out in his toast, the future is moving fast, and sometimes the old guard gets caught in the crossfire. A nervous ripple of polite laughter flowed through the front tables. I saw Harper sink slightly lower into her chair, her eyes darting between me and her partner. Trent stood just a few feet away, crossing his arms over his chest, regaining his arrogant posture. He thought I was capitulating. He thought I was taking the high road to save face in front of my wealthy peers. Trent is a man of incredible ambition. I continued pacing slowly across the front of the staging area, letting the spotlight hit my stained tuxedo. "He spoke to you all about vision. He spoke about shaking off the old ways of doing things and embracing disruptive innovation. He believes that traditional business models like the commercial real estate empire I spent 40 years building are obsolete relics of the past. He believes that true wealth is generated through bold, aggressive leaps of faith. I stopped pacing and turned to look directly at him. And I must admit, I was deeply moved by his conviction. In fact, his unwavering confidence is precisely why we had a very private, very important meeting just 1 hour ago. A collective murmur of curiosity swept through the ballroom. The guests leaned forward in their velvet chairs. I saw Trent puff out his chest. He adjusted the lapels of his custom suit and smiled broadly at the audience. He was practically vibrating with excitement. He knew exactly what I was talking about. He thought this was his coronation. He thought the old fool was finally publicly bowing down to the new king. Exactly 60 minutes before this reception began, Trent and I met behind closed doors in the executive groom's suite. I announced my voice carrying a profound dramatic weight. In that room, Trent and I signed a highly complex, comprehensive legal contract. It was a binding agreement that will completely alter the trajectory of his artificial intelligence startup. It was a master purchase agreement finalizing a capital injection of exactly $5 million. The ballroom erupted into a spontaneous chorus of impressed gasps and scattered applause. $5 million was a staggering figure, even for the wealthy individuals in this room. They looked at Trent with newfound respect, whispering among themselves about the brilliant young visionary who had just secured massive funding from his legendary father-in-law. Trent beamed. He looked out at the sea of admiring faces, his chest swelling with supreme validation. He offered a humble, practiced nod to the crowd, soaking in their praise. He was living his ultimate fantasy. I let him enjoy the applause for exactly 15 seconds. I let him feel the absolute peak of his fraudulent victory. Then I lowered the microphone slightly and looked toward the back of the room, far beyond the crystal chandeliers and the towering floral arrangements. I locked eyes with the young audiovisual technician standing behind the glass window of the control booth. I gave him a single subtle nod. Trent smirked at me, mouthing the words "thank you" under his breath, fully expecting me to invite him back to the microphone to accept his grand gift. Instead, the projection screens behind the stage hummed to life. They descended smoothly from the hidden ceiling compartments above, glowing with a bright, clinical white light that completely illuminated the entire main stage below. The elegant monogram of the bride and groom vanished instantly, replaced by high-resolution scans of complex financial documents, offshore banking notices, and detailed wire transfer receipts. The string quartet was completely silent now. The polite applause from the crowd sputtered and died, replaced by a wave of sharp, confused murmurs. The high society guests squinted at the massive displays, trying to decipher the dense spreadsheets and red ink warnings that now hovered above us like digital storm clouds. Trent turned around to look at the screens. His arrogant smile faltered for a fraction of a second, but he quickly forced it back into place. He looked back at me, his eyes darting frantically, trying to understand what kind of elaborate presentation I had prepared. He still thought this was a quirky, eccentric way of announcing my financial backing. He thought I was showing the crowd the depth of my commitment to his corporate vision. He had no idea he was looking at the autopsy report of his own financial ruin. I raised the microphone back to my lips. My voice cut through the growing whispers in the ballroom, sharp and unyielding. As I said, Trent and I signed a master purchase agreement today, I announced, stepping closer to the edge of the stage. But I think there has been a slight misunderstanding regarding the nature of that $5 million transaction. You see, when you conduct business at the highest levels, you must always read the fine print. A visionary should know better than anyone that the devil is always in the details. Trent's smile finally cracked. The color began to drain from his face as he stared at the screen directly behind me, which now displayed the Cayman Islands past due notice, clearly bearing his name. I did not provide a $5 million angel investment to fund a revolutionary artificial intelligence startup. I continued, my words echoing relentlessly off the marble columns. In fact, there is no startup. There are no servers, no proprietary algorithms, and no groundbreaking software. There is only a dusty, empty closet in a suburban strip mall containing 2 dead laptops. That is the entire pathetic extent of Trent's fake technological empire. A loud collective gasp ripped through the audience. I saw venture capitalists in the front row exchange alarmed glances. Harper sat frozen at the family table, her eyes wide as she looked from the screen to the man she was supposed to marry in less than 20 minutes. What I actually did today, I said, gesturing toward the screen, was purchase a phantom shell corporation. But more importantly, I legally purchased all of its underlying liabilities. If you look closely at Section 42 of the contract Trent eagerly signed an hour ago, you will find a very specific liability assumption clause. I agreed to acquire his empty company, but he agreed to remain personally, unconditionally liable for all undisclosed offshore debts, fraudulent wire transfers, and illicit gambling markers accumulated right before today. Trent stumbled backward, as if he had been physically struck. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. The screens shifted seamlessly, displaying the itemized receipts from the VIP casino syndicate in Macau, followed immediately by the wire transfer records funneling stolen money into the personal checking account of his mistress, Melissa. The ballroom descended into absolute chaos. Guests whispered furiously. Waiters backed away against the walls. Harper let out a choked, devastated sob, finally covering her face with her trembling hands, as the undeniable proof of his infidelity and theft was broadcast to the entire room. Trent. I said, my voice rising just enough to command absolute silence once again. Did you really think you could drain $500,000 from my daughter's trust fund to pay off foreign loan sharks and fund your mistress without me ever noticing? Did you genuinely believe you could outsmart a man who was building empires before you were even born? He began to shake his head frantically, his breathing shallow and rapid. He looked like a trapped animal. "Harrison, please," he stammered, his voice weak and pathetic. "I am not finished," I stated, stepping right in front of him. The most crucial part of our little arrangement was the marital asset waiver. In exchange for the illusion of my $5 million backing, you voluntarily and irrevocably renounced any current or future claims to the assets, trust funds, real estate, and inheritances belonging to Harper Cole. That predatory prenuptial agreement you tried to legally force her to sign is now completely null and totally void. You traded your access to her wealth for a phantom investment contract that legally binds your $1 million offshore debt directly to your own personal Social Security number. You did not secure your future today. You handed me the keys to your complete and total destruction. The reality of his situation finally crashed down upon him. The arrogance, the smug superiority, the manipulative charm, all of it evaporated in an instant. He was left with nothing but the crushing, suffocating weight of his own monumental greed. He looked at me, his eyes wide with a raw, primal terror. He was shivering, his custom tuxedo suddenly looking like a cheap little costume. I lowered the heavy microphone down slowly. I stepped so incredibly close to him that I could clearly see the cold sweat beading on his pale forehead. The man who had mocked my late wife, who had manipulated my naive daughter, and who had thrown a glass of red wine in my face an hour ago, was now a broken, hyperventilating shell. I leaned in, ensuring that only he could hear the final, devastating truth. I locked my eyes onto his terrified gaze, letting the absolute coldness of my vengeance completely wash over him. "I own everything you have." The 5 words hung heavily in the air between us, sealing his absolute destruction. I stepped back, allowing the massive screens behind me to cycle into the final, irrefutable phase of my presentation. The financial ledgers and offshore bank notices dissolved, replaced immediately by high-resolution, full-color photographs. There was Trent Lawson standing on the balcony of a luxury hotel in Miami with his arms wrapped tightly around Melissa. The next slide showed them laughing over expensive cocktails at a Michelin-starred restaurant. The timestamp on the photograph clearly indicated it was taken 3 days after he had proposed. The grand ballroom of the Waldorf Astoria completely shattered. The polite, suppressed whispers of Boston's elite instantly morphed into a deafening roar of outrage and disgust. A prominent investment banker in the front row slammed his champagne glass down onto a table so hard the delicate crystal stem shattered. Several older socialites openly gasped, pointing at the towering images of the groom holding his mistress. The meticulously curated illusion of Trent's high society wedding collapsed into a chaotic, humiliating circus. I looked over at the family table. Harper had just collapsed forward, burying her wet face deep in her arms. She was sobbing with the mixture of profound heartbreak and overwhelming humiliation. Two of her bridesmaids rushed to her side, shielding her from the glaring lights of the screens. Trent realized his entire world was burning to ash in front of 158 influential witnesses. The paralyzing fear that had gripped him just seconds ago violently mutated into a blind, explosive rage. His face turned a dark, furious shade of crimson. He let out a primal, agonizing scream that echoed over the chaotic murmurs of the crowd. "You set me up!" he roared, his voice cracking loudly. "You planned this from the start, you manipulative old fool." He lunged at me. He threw his entire body weight forward. His hands curled into tight fists, aiming directly for my face. He wanted to physically tear me down because he had completely failed to defeat me intellectually. I did not flinch. I did not raise my hands to defend myself. I simply stood my ground, knowing I was entirely protected. Before Trent could even close the short distance between us, two massive figures materialized from the shadows near the edge of the stage. They were certainly not hotel staff. They were highly trained private security contractors, personally vetted and hired by Victor Thorne. They moved with terrifying practiced efficiency. The first contractor intercepted Trent mid-stride, driving a heavy shoulder directly into the chest of the groom. His breath left his lungs in a sharp, painful hiss as he was forcefully tackled backward. The second contractor immediately swept the legs out from under him. Trent slammed hard onto the polished marble floor, his expensive custom tuxedo sliding across the spilled wine from earlier. He thrashed wildly, kicking and screaming obscene insults at me, but the massive contractors overpowered him. They pinned him face down against the cold stone, twisting his arms securely behind his back. Trent gasped for air, his cheek pressed firmly against the wet marble, completely neutralized and utterly humiliated. The ballroom grew quiet again, the guests watching the physical altercation with wide, shocked eyes. From the back of the room, the heavy brass doors swung open with a resounding thud. Gregory Pierce walked down the center aisle, moving with the cold, measured authority of a corporate executioner. He was no longer playing the role of a silent observer. He held his phone tightly in one hand. He adjusted his suit jacket with the other hand. Gregory stopped at the base of the stage and looked down at the struggling groom. Trent Lawson. Gregory announced, his voice projecting clearly across the silent room. The facade is officially over. As the legal representative for the Cole family and the primary counsel handling your newly acquired corporate liabilities, I have just concluded a very detailed conversation with the local authorities. Trent stopped thrashing, panting heavily as he stared up at the attorney. Gregory did not offer a single ounce of pity. The Financial Crimes Division has reviewed absolutely everything. They have seen the extensive documentation of your fraudulent wire transfers, your offshore tax evasion, and your illicit gambling operations. Gregory continued smoothly. A team of police officers is currently waiting for you in the main lobby. They have a warrant for your immediate arrest on multiple counts of severe financial fraud and grand larceny. Trent squeezed his eyes shut, letting out a pathetic, whimpering sob. He knew there was no escape. He knew he could not charm his way out of a federal indictment, and he certainly could not afford a competent defense attorney because I legally owned everything. His phantom company, his massive debts, and his complete lack of marital claims had boxed him into a corner from which he would never emerge. "Pick him up," I ordered the security contractors. They hauled Trent to his feet. His knees trembled so violently they could barely support his weight. His tuxedo was stained with spilled wine and dirt from the floor. He looked nothing like a confident tech visionary. He looked exactly like the pathetic, desperate fraud he had always been. The contractors firmly gripped his arms and began to march him down the center aisle of the ballroom. As he was dragged past the rows of horrified guests, Trent did not look at any of them. He kept his head bowed, the weight of his absolute destruction crushing his shoulders. He passed the family table, but Harper did not look up. She kept her face hidden completely, erasing him from her life. The man who had planned to steal my daughter's future, ruin her heart, and mock my legacy was now taking a very different walk down the aisle. He was marched out through the brass doors, his reputation annihilated, his freedom revoked, and his finances completely gone. The heavy brass doors swung shut with a resounding thud, cutting off the sound of Trent Lawson being handed over to the authorities. The grand ballroom of the Waldorf Astoria, which an hour ago had been vibrating with polite chatter, now felt like a sprawling, empty cavern. Gregory Pierce stepped to the microphone. With the clinical efficiency of a seasoned attorney, he announced that the wedding was permanently canceled. He politely but firmly instructed the guests to gather their belongings and exit the premises. They moved toward the coat check in hushed clusters. The caterers packed away the silver trays. The string quartet packed their instruments and slipped out the service doors. Within 15 minutes, the opulent space was stripped of its celebratory illusion. I remained standing on the edge of the low stage. I watched the room empty, feeling the damp chill of the wine clinging to my collar. The massive projection screens behind me faded to black, signaling the absolute end of the spectacle. I stepped down onto the marble floor. From the far corner of the room, near the abandoned family table, Harper slowly stood up. She looked small and fragile inside the billowing layers of her expensive white lace gown. Her perfect bridal makeup was completely ruined, washed away by streaks of heavy mascara and endless tears. She took a hesitant step toward me and then began to walk faster. She was seeking the familiar shelter she had known her entire life. She was looking for her father to wrap his arms around her and to promise her that everything was going to be perfectly fine. She closed the distance between us, raising her hands to embrace me, her chest heaving with desperate sobs. She wanted the soft landing her mother would have provided, a shield from the devastating reality. I did not open my arms. I took a deliberate step backward, maintaining a clear physical boundary between us. Harper froze, her hands dropping awkwardly to her sides. She looked up at me, her red, swollen eyes wide with fresh confusion and profound hurt. "Dad," she whispered, her voice trembling with raw vulnerability. "Please, I am so sorry. I did not know. I swear I did not know what he was doing." I looked at my daughter, feeling a deep ache in my chest, but I did not let a single trace of that emotion reach my face. "I know you did not know about the money." "Harper," I replied, my voice calm, steady, and devoid of comfort. "I know you did not know about the mistress or the offshore debts. You were blind to his crimes because you desperately wanted to believe his lies, but that is not why I am standing here like this." I gestured down at my ruined tuxedo jacket. "I want you to think back to exactly 20 minutes ago," I continued, my gaze locking firmly onto hers, "when Trent Lawson intentionally tripped and hurled a full glass of red wine directly into my face. When he publicly humiliated your father in front of your friends, your family, and your peers. I want you to remember exactly what you did in that moment." Harper swallowed hard, her gaze dropping to the polished floor. She began to cry harder, her shoulders shaking. "I did nothing," she choked out. "I was scared of making a scene." "Exactly," I stated coldly. "You did absolutely nothing. You sat in your chair completely paralyzed. You watched a man disrespect the father who provided everything you have ever had and chose silence. You chose to protect the aesthetic perfection of your wedding day over defending your own blood. You were deeply chained to your codependency and lacked the basic courage to demand respect." "That silence," Harper told me everything I needed to know, I said, leaning slightly closer so she could hear the absolute finality in my words. "It proved to me that you are not ready for the reality of this world. You are unequipped to manage the kind of wealth your mother and I built for you. A woman who cannot find the strength to speak up when her father is publicly attacked will never have the strength to protect an empire from the predators who circle it. Predators exactly like Trent Lawson. Harper looked up, her expression shifting from sorrow to sheer panic. "What does that mean?" she asked, wiping a trembling hand across her stained cheek. "It means the safety net is gone," I answered smoothly. "The remaining $3.2 million in your trust fund is frozen indefinitely. Gregory Pierce has initiated legal injunctions based on your demonstrated vulnerability to severe financial coercion. You will not have access to a single penny." "But how am I supposed to live?" she asked, the reality of the situation finally crashing down upon her. "I have rent. I have bills." "You are going to do what every other capable adult in this city does," I replied without a shred of pity. "You are going to end a job. You are going to work 40 hours a week. You will learn the actual value of $1, and you will learn how to stand on your own 2 feet, without a man or a trust fund holding you up. When you prove that you have grown a spine, we will revisit the accounts. Until then, you are entirely on your own." I did not wait for her response. I turned my back on my weeping daughter and the ruined grandeur of the ballroom. I walked steadily across the marble floor, tossing my wine-stained jacket onto an empty chair. I pushed through the heavy brass doors and stepped out into the crisp Boston air. My waiting town car pulled up to the curb immediately. I slid into the leather back seat, feeling the quiet calm of a man who had successfully excised a cancer from his legacy. I was victorious, entirely rational, and completely in control. The greatest lesson I learned from this ordeal was not about protecting wealth, but how we raise our children. Wrapping them in silk does not create a shield. It simply turns them into prey for opportunists. Harper's silence while her father was humiliated was the direct result of my overprotection. Sometimes the most profound act of love a father can offer is to ruthlessly cut the lifeline, forcing them to survive the storm. Money can easily buy a company or crush a fraud, but true dignity, resilience, and self-respect must always be earned through your own sweat and tears. What do you think about my decision to freeze the trust fund and walk away from my daughter? Was this harsh reality necessary, or did I go too far? Please let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Do not forget to like and subscribe for more life lessons.